I have always loved driving, spending hours on the road with music playing and letting my mind wander. Sometimes, I even end up sleeping in my car by the side of a quiet country road. I usually travel solo since I don't enjoy being a passenger. Most times, I'll take a nap, wake up, and head home without any issues. Occasionally, I've been startled by a deer or someone knocking on my window to check if I'm okay, which has made me jump, but nothing compares to what happened last night. I took my dogs out for a nice walk at a place I read about online. It was a good 5-hour drive away, and I planned to break up the journey by stopping every hour or so to explore, ensuring the dogs didn't get too restless. I packed enough food and water, planning to be out for a day. The park I was headed to is a popular spot with lots of caravans and the like staying overnight. It was a beautiful day, and we had a great time. When we reached the spot where I planned to sleep, there was no space left to park. The parking area wasn't well defined, so you just had to find a spot where you weren't blocking anyone. It was a small parking area that could only hold about 10 vehicles without getting too cramped. A bit annoyed, I decided to keep driving and eventually pulled into a lay-by to rest before heading home. I let the dogs out to stretch their legs, then settled in to sleep, thinking nothing of it. The place I parked was across from a small cottage, but not directly in front of it, and there were plenty of trees around, so I didn't feel like I was intruding. I felt very safe. However, for some reason, I couldn't seem to fall asleep, which was unusual for me since I usually sleep like a log in my car, which is spacious and comfy. I genuinely believed there was nothing to worry about, until a long, high-pitched scraping noise jolted me and the dogs awake around 11 p.m., just as I had dozed off. The dogs went berserk, barking like mad, and I was still groggy when I noticed a very tall man, probably in his 50s, dragging what looked like a key around the edges of my car. He moved slowly, never taking his eyes off me, with a wicked grin on his face. Terrified, I quickly adjusted my seat and started the car, ready to speed off, but he walked to the front of the car where I couldn't reverse due to the trees. That's when I saw he was holding a butcher knife, which he lifted and waved at me. I screamed and hit the horn, and my dogs were going wild, practically foaming at the mouth, but it didn't seem to bother him. This eerie standoff lasted maybe 10 to 15 seconds. Then he just turned around and walked back across the road into the cottage. I drove home without stopping, completely shaken. I've decided never to do that again. Thanks for ruining it for me, truly terrifying man, and for messing up my car's paint. I'm not sure if he was trying to teach me a lesson for parking near his house or what, but it's something I'll never forget. I had just turned 21, so I hadn't been to many bars before. My buddy was already pretty tipsy when we headed out since he'd been drinking on the way. When we got to the bar, I sat down, and a girl with bright, almost unnatural, red hair came over to chat with us. She introduced herself as Amber. She was flirting with both of us, though my friend was already pretty far gone. I played along, acting like I was more drunk than I actually was, just to keep things going. Amber seemed like she might be looking for free drinks, so I told her we didn't have much money. Surprisingly, she offered to buy us drinks and kept them coming. I started getting confused about whether she liked me or my friend more. At one point, my friend went to the bathroom, but he got kicked out by the bouncers before he could come back. Amber and I followed him outside, and she kept insisting that he should go home with her. He was so out of it that he could barely respond. I told her he was too drunk, and I couldn't let him go off like that. I didn't want him waking up hungover in some strange place with no idea what had happened. Amber kept pushing, saying she'd take care of him, but I insisted that if he was going anywhere, I had to go with him since he was my responsibility. I think she assumed I was jealous or something, but my friend could barely stand and seemed to have lost interest in her anyway. Then, she shifted her attention to me and offered to call a cab for my friend, so we could go to her place alone. I'd had a few drinks by this point and was feeling buzzed, so I agreed. We put my friend in a cab, and then Amber and I walked to her car. On the way, I stumbled a bit, and she joked, "You're pretty drunk, huh?" With a smile, holding onto my arm. I admitted that I was, but something about how smoothly everything was happening made me a little uneasy. We got in her car, and she suggested stopping at a liquor store to get more to drink, offering to pay. I didn't really want to drink more, but I didn't want to seem boring, so I asked her to get me a small bottle with some juice to chase it. She came back with a lot more than just a small bottle, and I assumed she wanted to drink too. As we drove, we passed the bottle back and forth, but I noticed she was only taking tiny sips while encouraging me to drink more. I started pretending to drink by spitting the liquor into the juice bottle, then tossed the bottle out the window so she wouldn't notice. She seemed to believe I was much drunker than I really was. I called her by the wrong name a few times on purpose to see how she'd react, but she didn't correct me, which made me think she might have lied about her name. We eventually reached her house, and I pretended to stumble and trip as we got to her front door. She helped me inside, and I noticed she locked the door behind us, which struck me as odd. I asked to use the bathroom, went inside, and locked the door. I looked at myself in the mirror, feeling uneasy, like something wasn't right. I turned on the sink to make some noise and made myself throw up the liquor I had drunk earlier. Then, I drank some tap water from my hands to sober up. I still wanted to hook up with Amber, but I felt like I needed to stay sharp. As I turned off the sink, I heard her talking to someone. "He's really drunk, barely able to stand." "You do it," she said. My heart started racing. Who was she talking to? Do what? I walked out of the bathroom and into the living room, just in time to see Amber heading into another room. All I saw was the back of her head with that bright red hair disappearing into the darkness. "Hey, where are you going?" I slurred, trying to sound drunk. She came back into the living room and suggested we go to her room. But as I looked at her, I realized her face was different. It was a completely different girl wearing the same wig. My heart nearly stopped, but I tried to act like I didn't notice. I smiled and told her I needed to use the bathroom one more time, apologizing for being so drunk. She seemed irritated but told me to hurry. I went back into the bathroom, locked the door, and heard her whispering to someone again. This time, I thought I heard a man's voice respond. I didn't catch what they said, but it was clear something shady was going on. I knew I had to get out of there. I opened the bathroom window and climbed out, running faster than I ever have in my life. I didn't look back, just kept running through yards until I hit a road. Eventually, I reached a convenience store and stayed in front of the camera, calling a taxi to take me home. I still wonder what they were planning that night. Why did she use a fake name? Why were they so insistent on getting us drunk? And what was with the wig? I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly avoided something terrible. I live near the American River in Sacramento, California, just a few miles from the river itself. A short walk from my neighborhood leads to an old part of town where all you'll find are chickens roaming around in small, family-run businesses. My first job was at a family-owned coffee shop in that little town when I was 16. To give you some context, a lot of homeless people would gather by the river, and they often wandered into the shop. I got used to dealing with different folks almost every day, and it didn't bother me much. But there was one guy I remember vividly, and it still gives me chills to think about. When I first started at the shop, it took me a while to get to know the regulars and remember their names. There were so many faces, but one face stood out more than the others for some reason. A short, bald man with a wide nose and thin glasses. He wasn't very old, but not young either. He had a habit of standing outside the shop for about 10 minutes every day before coming in. Once inside, he would stand in the back of the cafe, just watching me and my coworkers as we cleaned and made coffee. Sometimes he wouldn't order anything, but when he did, it was always the same. A small black coffee and a little serving of potato salad. Every time, he would ask for napkins and a pen after ordering. Then he'd write something on one of the napkins, leave his empty cup on the table, and take his food to go, usually standing outside the shop, watching us as we cleaned up after him. Over time, I noticed that he seemed a bit annoyed whenever I wasn't the one to pick up his trash. He started leaving small notes on the napkins in rough, poor handwriting. At first, the notes seemed harmless, even sweet, like a simple thank you. But slowly, they started to get weirder. What started as simple notes like, "Have a great day," turned into things like, "You look beautiful today," or "I love your hair." My coworkers would sometimes joke about the notes if they found them before I did. But once he realized other girls were picking them up, he started leaving them on the counter near the espresso machine, where only I would see them. One note even said, "You make me happy, Kate." To this day, I still don't know how he learned my name or who he asked, but I suspect one of my coworkers might have told him when I wasn't around. As the weeks went on, I started feeling more and more uncomfortable whenever he stood outside, watching me work, or when he ordered from me directly. But I always smiled and thanked him as I got his coffee and salad, keeping my customer service persona intact. Then came the part that really got creepy. One day, toward the end of summer, he did his usual routine of looking through the window before coming in to order. But this time, he didn't ask for napkins or a pen, just his coffee. After ordering, he went to the restroom. I lost track of how long he was in there because I went on my lunch break right after. When I returned, one of my coworkers mentioned that someone had left their cup in the restroom, and it was found empty on top of the toilet. When I went to check, I realized the cup wasn't just empty. It had been filled with something disturbing. I didn't see him for a while after that because I switched from morning shifts to closing shifts. The last time I saw him, he came in late, probably figuring out my new schedule either by watching or asking my coworkers. He politely asked for a coffee, potato salad, a pen, and a napkin. I complied, though I wasn't exactly thrilled about it. He followed his usual routine, drinking his coffee, writing on the napkin, and leaving it on the counter without looking up before walking out into the night. This time, the note he left read, "You're lovely every time. Thanks for the smiles. Leave the glitter to the blondes." I have no idea what that last part meant. He also wrote, "You're a young flower in the sunset, Kate." After that, I never saw him again, either in the shop or outside by the window. I don't lend out pens as much as I used to now. Months ago, I began a part-time job at a large electronics retail store. I'm a woman in my mid-20s, about 6 feet tall, and I used to play college water polo. My main responsibilities were handling calls, assisting with orders, complaints, and scheduling. Occasionally, I helped out at the registers when things got busy. I'm a friendly, outgoing person, and I enjoy chatting with customers, often joking around with regulars, always keeping it professional, never suggestive. This all happened within about 2 months. One day, a customer, an older man in his 60s, around 6 feet 6 inches, who had become a regular, approached me while I was at the register. He was holding a coffee, and I jokingly asked where mine was. He offered to get me one, but I declined several times, saying, "Oh no, I was just kidding. Thanks though," and went about my day. Over the next few days, I started noticing him more often and ended up processing a lot of his purchases. We engaged in small talk, but then he began mentioning personal details about me. Things I had never shared, like my commute, the type of car I drive, its stickers, the college I attended, the apartment complex I lived in, and even the decorations outside my door. At first, I dismissed these comments, thinking he might have overheard something, but then he asked for my phone number. I declined, citing store policy, but he kept insisting I take his number and call him. Again, I reiterated that it was against company rules to exchange personal information with customers. Despite this, he began intercepting me as I moved around the store, placing himself in my path and demanding my number. This happened several times, with him invading my personal space more each time and becoming increasingly aggressive. If he didn't get me at the register, he would get upset, trying to force himself into my space to demand my information. My coworkers had to intervene and physically remove me from these situations because they were worried about my safety. By this point, I was feeling scared and unsafe at work, so I reported it to a couple of my supervisors, but they just laughed it off, calling me paranoid. I started calling my dad almost daily to tell him about these encounters. Finally, he suggested I go to the police. I went to the station, explained the situation, and ended up in tears, realizing just how serious it was. The police filed a report and advised me to give it to my supervisors so they could identify the man and issue a trespass order. I provided the case number to my supervisors, who began investigating. Despite primarily working behind the scenes, they discovered that in just 30 days, I had processed over 17 transactions with this customer. He had been visiting the store 4 to 5 times a week, sometimes twice a day, just to buy small gift cards. After gathering information and taking photos of his license plate, the police learned that he lived over 90 minutes away and was driving almost 3 hours round trip just to make these purchases. When my supervisors reviewed the security footage, they noticed he had been avoiding the cameras, hiding his face and hunching over to conceal his height. They also saw that he would often linger in the store for 35 to 45 minutes, just watching the registers, waiting for me to appear. If he missed me, he would return later, right around the time my shift ended, as he seemed to know my schedule. Because there was no clear image of him, the store had to rely on me to identify him so they could issue the trespass order. He continued to harass and threaten me for my information several times because no one knew exactly what he looked like. It took another 2 weeks before I finally managed to point him out to a supervisor. He cornered me again, demanding my number, but I was able to slip away, and the supervisor approached him, issuing the trespass order for harassing employees. He denied everything, claiming they had the wrong person. When the police contacted him to explain the trespass boundaries and ask for his side of the story, he claimed that I had never told him no, implying that it was my fault. He argued that he shouldn't be banned from the store, insisting that if I didn't want him to bother me, I should have been clearer. I saw him around my apartment complex a few times after that, and a few months later, I left the retail job because I no longer felt comfortable there. I had enjoyed working there, but I never wanted to risk encountering him again. Months ago, I began a part-time job at a large electronics retail store. I'm a woman in my mid-20s, about 6 feet tall, and I used to play college water polo. My main responsibilities were handling calls, assisting with orders, complaints, and scheduling. Occasionally, I helped out at the registers when things got busy. I'm a friendly, outgoing person, and I enjoy chatting with customers, often joking around with regulars, always keeping it professional, never suggestive. This all happened within about 2 months. One day, a customer, an older man in his 60s, around 6 feet 6 inches, who had become a regular, approached me while I was at the register. He was holding a coffee, and I jokingly asked where mine was. He offered to get me one, but I declined several times, saying, "Oh no, I was just kidding. Thanks though," and went about my day. Over the next few days, I started noticing him more often and ended up processing a lot of his purchases. We engaged in small talk, but then he began mentioning personal details about me. Things I had never shared, like my commute, the type of car I drive, its stickers, the college I attended, the apartment complex I lived in, and even the decorations outside my door. At first, I dismissed these comments, thinking he might have overheard something, but then he asked for my phone number. I declined, citing store policy, but he kept insisting I take his number and call him. Again, I reiterated that it was against company rules to exchange personal information with customers. Despite this, he began intercepting me as I moved around the store, placing himself in my path and demanding my number. This happened several times, with him invading my personal space more each time and becoming increasingly aggressive. If he didn't get me at the register, he would get upset, trying to force himself into my space to demand my information. My coworkers had to intervene and physically remove me from these situations because they were worried about my safety. By this point, I was feeling scared and unsafe at work, so I reported it to a couple of my supervisors, but they just laughed it off, calling me paranoid. I started calling my dad almost daily to tell him about these encounters. Finally, he suggested I go to the police. I went to the station, explained the situation, and ended up in tears, realizing just how serious it was. The police filed a report and advised me to give it to my supervisors so they could identify the man and issue a trespass order. I provided the case number to my supervisors, who began investigating. Despite primarily working behind the scenes, they discovered that in just 30 days, I had processed over 17 transactions with this customer. He had been visiting the store 4 to 5 times a week, sometimes twice a day, just to buy small gift cards. After gathering information and taking photos of his license plate, the police learned that he lived over 90 minutes away and was driving almost 3 hours round trip just to make these purchases. When my supervisors reviewed the security footage, they noticed he had been avoiding the cameras, hiding his face and hunching over to conceal his height. They also saw that he would often linger in the store for 35 to 45 minutes, just watching the registers, waiting for me to appear. If he missed me, he would return later, right around the time my shift ended, as he seemed to know my schedule. Because there was no clear image of him, the store had to rely on me to identify him so they could issue the trespass order. He continued to harass and threaten me for my information several times because no one knew exactly what he looked like. It took another 2 weeks before I finally managed to point him out to a supervisor. He cornered me again, demanding my number, but I was able to slip away, and the supervisor approached him, issuing the trespass order for harassing employees. He denied everything, claiming they had the wrong person. When the police contacted him to explain the trespass boundaries and ask for his side of the story, he claimed that I had never told him no, implying that it was my fault. He argued that he shouldn't be banned from the store, insisting that if I didn't want him to bother me, I should have been clearer. I saw him around my apartment complex a few times after that, and a few months later, I left the retail job because I no longer felt comfortable there. I had enjoyed working there, but I never wanted to risk encountering him again. A 34-year-old woman relocated from Miami, Florida, to a remote area about 18 miles outside a small town named Pineville. She had never faced any problems in Miami, but after a divorce, she moved in with her mother. It was just her and her 2 young children. They settled into an old farmhouse on her family's land, which required extensive repairs. When they arrived, only 2 rooms were livable, and they spent the next 9 months fixing up the rest of the house. Their neighbor, whom we'll call Sam, was very helpful from the start. He came by nearly every day, taking care of his animals and assisting with anything she needed. Throughout the 9 months, she perceived him as a kind, middle-aged man and never suspected any ill will. The farmhouse had a U-shaped design, with windows facing a central courtyard area. Sam had fenced this area when she first moved in to allow her children to play safely. Since the house was set back from the road and surrounded by farmland, she felt secure, especially as her bedroom and bathroom windows were in the fenced courtyard. Thus, she did not install curtains on these windows. One day, while her son was playing under the carport, Sam arrived in his truck to inspect her car. Before he reached the carport, her oldest son mentioned that he had seen Sam outside his window the previous night. She asked him if it was the kitchen window, which overlooked Sam's horse pasture where he fed his horses each morning. She initially dismissed it, thinking it was just a misunderstanding. Over time, she hoped Sam was genuinely the nice person she believed him to be. Her favorite candies started appearing in her fridge, and someone sent her flowers every Friday for several months. She assumed it was either her ex-husband or her boyfriend at the time, but neither admitted to it. Her boyfriend even joked that it was Sam. The following day, after returning from school, she found Sam working on her car. Her air suspension had a leak, and Sam offered to fix it before she had to take it to a distant city for a costly repair. As she leaned over the hood of the car, Sam stepped back. She commented on his old-style cell phone, which was similar to early camera flip phones. Later that night, her mother suggested that she thought Sam might have taken a picture of her. Although it sounded strange, she didn't take it seriously, as Sam had always been friendly and never seemed suspicious. He had refused payment for his help, which she now realized might have been a red flag. A few weeks later, while mowing the overgrown courtyard, she noticed center blocks placed outside her bathroom windows. She couldn't explain why, but she felt she had made a grave error in trusting Sam. She called her friend and neighbor, Mark, who brought over a trail camera and set it up outside her window around 3 p.m. That evening, she came home around 6 o'clock and was unloading her children when she saw Sam standing behind her. He said he didn't mean to startle her and mentioned knowing her mother was out of town, likely from Facebook. He offered to help if she felt scared or needed anything. After putting the children to bed, she went to her mother's room to catch up on a missed TV show. While discussing the children with her ex-husband, Mark called and asked if her boyfriend was there. She replied no, and Mark informed her that a man was outside her window. The trail camera captured the first image at 9:02 p.m., with her children asleep in her room. Mark told her not to worry, as he was already on his way. Overcome with fear, she quickly gathered her children, locked the door, and ran to Mark's truck where they waited for the police. The trail camera captured images at 9:02, 9:22, and 9:30 p.m., showing Sam waiting outside her window. The police searched the area but couldn't find Sam, who had disappeared into the nearby fields. The camera images helped identify Sam, who was arrested around 2 a.m. that night. When authorities checked his phone, they discovered 9 months' worth of photos, images of her mowing, playing with her children, and even in her bathroom. She couldn't sleep properly for weeks after discovering this. Sam was released the following weekend and went to her mother's post office to tell her that he had found and buried her deceased dog. Despite this, he received only 5 years probation and a restraining order. He still lives across the street. She stayed for about 3 months before moving to a new city, Fort Walton Beach. People who know me might recognize this story because of how chaotic it was. I'm a woman living in New England, and this happened in a decent neighborhood. We weren't poor or anything, but here's the story. A few years ago, the day before my 10th birthday, my mom, little brother, and I were returning home from one of my brother's soccer games. As we approached our house, my brother noticed a yard sale at the rundown house next door. There had been some police activity there before I was born, but I thought it was all over. A man came up to us as we were walking over. We'll call him Tom. Tom was renting from the woman next door who had a house with 4 rooms, 1 for herself, 1 for her disabled son, and 2 for renters. Tom seemed friendly. He played soccer with my brother and chatted pleasantly with my mom. He looked a bit rough around the edges, but I just wanted to get inside and play Minecraft, so I didn't think much of it. This was in October. By late January, a few months later, I was barely awake when my dad picked me up from my bed and carried me to the master bedroom, where my mom and brother were. The master bedroom was the farthest room from where Tom lived. I didn't like being woken up, so I ran back to my room. My dad yelled for me to stay in the master bedroom because the police were next door. I did as I was told, feeling very frightened. It turned out that Tom's ex-partner had come by to collect some things, bringing a new boyfriend with her. Tom attacked the boyfriend with a knife and the police were called. There was a lot of commotion, including guns, but I thought it was a one-time thing and that we'd be safe after that. In March, my mom picked me up from school as usual. My brother was staying late for some extra lessons, so she would get him later. I threw my backpack in the trunk and noticed there were many suitcases back there. She cheerfully told me we were going to stay in a hotel. We drove around town, and then she said my dad would take me back home, and we wouldn't be staying at a hotel after all. When we arrived home with my dad, I saw police tape around our yard. My dad said they had found drugs in Tom's house. It didn't sink in until later, but the full story was that Tom had been doing PCP on his front steps. Someone called the police, who chased Tom into the next town over and investigated the house. An officer picked up a package of drugs and had a severe reaction. Hazmat teams were called and they discovered a drug lab. Initially thought to be a meth lab, the police advised us to evacuate. Turned out it wasn't a meth lab but a PCP lab, and we could return home later. My mom and brother came home a few hours after I did, and that's when it really hit me. I had an anxiety attack, couldn't eat, and hid behind the couch. I didn't sleep that night. Later, Tom was released from jail but continued with illegal activities. However, the evidence room was tampered with, so he couldn't be convicted. In the meantime, my family bought a new house with a large dog, security cameras, and plenty of weapons. My brother and I were already in therapy, but our sessions became more frequent. We were set to move in 2 months. During this time, Tom would watch us from his back porch. My dad confronted him once, and Tom responded with death threats. On the day we moved, Tom let his pit bull loose, not realizing we had already left. He just knew it was around the time we usually walked our dog. About a month later, Tom, high on PCP, went into a local grocery store and picked up a small child. When the parents noticed, Tom dropped the child and tried to hide, but the police caught him. He was released from jail a month later due to overcrowding. I'm not sure what the final outcome was, but I think Tom might have been capable of kidnapping. It's terrifying to think about what might have happened to me and my brother. Tom, I helped you overdose on your stupid PCP. I gave you a chance, and all you gave me and my brother was childhood trauma. 3 years ago, when I was 22 and recently single, my best friend and I started hanging out at our favorite bar nearly every night. It was an Irish pub in a decent part of town, and it had a cozy vibe. We had become friends with the bartenders there. For context, I'm a woman and my best friend is a bisexual man, and there was no romantic involvement between us. One evening, while we were enjoying a few drinks, a man in his 30s or 40s with a strong Irish accent walked in. My friend and I were chatting, and I mentioned my new shirt. The man, who we'll call Liam, complimented me loudly from across the bar, saying how stunning I looked. He asked the bartender to tell me how beautiful I was. The bartender, used to dealing with odd characters, gave Liam a strange look but ignored him. About 10 minutes later, Liam came over and sat next to me. Usually, I'd avoid creepy people, but with just my friend and me left in the bar, I decided to chat. Liam seemed friendly enough at first, talking about his plans to buy the bar, which struck us as odd since we knew the place was family-owned. He mentioned he'd be back in about 20 minutes to get his cousin from a nearby hotel. When Liam returned, he brought a very attractive woman with him. My friend, who hadn't had much luck with women lately, was quite taken with her. I encouraged him to go for it, thinking it would be a great opportunity for him. I went outside for a cigarette, leaving my friend with the woman. While outside, Liam approached and offered to give me a palm reading. He took my hand and started kissing it, claiming to come from a long line of gypsies. He made vague predictions that didn't seem to apply to me. He suggested that his cousins were looking for a fun night and wanted us to show them around. I said we were pretty out of it and thinking of heading home. Liam then said, "Oh, it looks like your friend isn't going anywhere." I looked inside and saw his cousin rubbing her foot up and down my friend's leg. My friend, who usually doesn't get such attention, was visibly embarrassed but excited. Despite feeling uneasy, I went back inside to check on things. My memory of what happened next is a bit fuzzy, but Liam became increasingly loud and aggressive. When I suggested we should leave, Liam started demanding more drinks and threw a fit when the bartender refused. He threw a $20 bill at the bartender and started causing a scene. A man got in my face, insisting I drink what he gave me, and I ended up drinking it. Realizing we might be in danger, my friend and I quickly left, running to my apartment and locking the door behind us. We were shaken and confused about what had just happened. 2 weeks later, we learned from the actual owner of the bar that Liam was a con artist who had stayed at the hotel across the street. He had been demanding a free room and making up stories about drugs to get what he wanted. The owner confirmed that Liam had no children and was not associated with the bar. I've wondered why Liam and his cousin tried to manipulate us. I initially thought it might be a robbery or something worse. I even looked into Irish gypsies who are known for traveling and stealing. If anyone knows more about this or has a similar story, I'd love to hear it, as this experience has left me quite unsettled. Growing up on a well-known haunted estate, I was never actually frightened by ghosts, more curious and intrigued. Despite my interest, there was only one time that scared me so much I swore never to go on another adventure like it. Interestingly, it wasn't even paranormal. When I was 19, my then boyfriend and I enjoyed exploring and decided to go ghost hunting around midnight. We lived in a small town in Virginia, so there were plenty of eerie spots to check out. We often visited places like Old House Woods and Crawford Road. On one occasion, we rounded up a few friends and planned a ghost hunt. We usually relaxed with some drinks before heading out, but this time we just grabbed some fast food and headed to Roswell House, planning to stop at Crawford Road on the way back. That night, everything started off really fun. We couldn't stop laughing, but one friend began feeling uneasy. He urged us to skip Crawford Road and head home or get some fast food instead. My boyfriend and I were set on visiting Crawford Road, and since my boyfriend was driving, our friend had no say. We drove to Crawford Road, known for its spooky bridge on a desolate road. The bridge was rumored to be a site where people were hanged, adding to its ghostly reputation. It was around 1:30 a.m. when we arrived. While my boyfriend and I were not scared, my friend was visibly frightened, which was unusual since he usually enjoyed these adventures. He kept insisting he had a bad feeling, and we should have listened. As we neared the bridge, we saw a car parked on the roadside. The car's lights turned on, revealing two bald men inside, which gave me chills. I told my boyfriend to keep driving, and he agreed that we shouldn't stop. As we turned the corner, the car followed us, turning on its high beams. We were unnerved, but thought it might just be a coincidence. After a couple of miles, the car was still tailing us. We sped up to 65 miles per hour, trying to shake them off, but they stayed close, almost touching our car. My friend was now crying in fear. Relieved to see a highway ahead, we sped through a stop sign, hoping the car would continue on the previous road. We spotted a 7-Eleven and thought if we turned in, they might leave us alone. Unfortunately, they followed us into the parking lot. We were alone in the lot, and none of us wanted to confront the bald men. In a panic, my boyfriend drove out of the lot with the car still following us. At this point, we thought we might die. We had no idea what their intentions were, but we knew it wasn't good. We sped down the highway at 100 miles per hour, and I called the police, though I was frantic and unfamiliar with the area. At one point, the car moved into the other lane, and I saw a metallic flash that might have been a gun. My boyfriend slammed on the brakes, and the other car continued at high speed. We quickly turned around, and by the time they turned, we were already speeding away. Somehow, we lost them and found a busy apartment complex to stop at. Shaken, we all started crying. My friend, who had warned us earlier, scolded us for not trusting our instincts. I've never ignored that gut feeling again. I later learned the area was known for gang activity. That night taught me that danger can lurk anywhere, and I regretted not being more cautious. I was naive to think that a haunted road couldn't pose a real threat.